Hi, I'm Jilly G. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to show you how to make gluten-free tortillas. And I already have a tortilla video and recipe here on my channel, but today I'm only using cassava flour. And these tortillas are the best tortillas that I've had gluten-free and that I've made gluten-free. My other recipe, it's in my cookbook also. That one is a really good recipe and I've been making it for many years. And people that I would share that recipe with would always say, wow, these are the best ones I've had. And they really are good. But these ones are better. And one of the things I really like about them is it's just one flour. There's no xanthan gum. There's no eggs. I am using butter today, but you could certainly use vegetable oil or even olive oil. So I've got 2 tablespoons of butter that I've cut up, and it's room temperature. It's not super duper soft. You can easily do this in a food processor, but I find that just hands works good. So you're just gonna rub the butter between your fingers into the flour. And I'm just making a single batch today, but usually when I make tortillas, I make as many as I can at one time, just because they make such a mess all over the kitchen. I've already got everything out. I might as well just do as many as I can. They freeze so well. And then you've got them in the freezer for whenever you want tortillas. Cassava flour is the closest to regular wheat flour, from what I've researched. Do your own research. Don't take my word for it. It does have a lot of the same similar ways that it acts in recipes. So I thought, why not give it a go with tortillas? And the results are absolutely amazing for a gluten-free tortilla. And you'll know that your mixture is ready when the flour feels a little bit heavier. There's not a lot of butter in here, so it won't resemble breadcrumbs so much, but you will notice a difference in your flour once you've got all of your butter rubbed in. And then I just give it a good once over just to make sure I do have uniform pieces of my butter and there's not really big chunks of butter in here somewhere. And before I'm done with that, I do have a half a teaspoon of salt and a half a teaspoon of baking powder. You can just mix that in with your hands at the same time. So once you've got your butter all rubbed in, I've got 3/4 of a cup of water. I'm going to use a spatula for this. It will get kind of sticky and it's easier to scrape the bowl. But if you want to just mix it in with your hands, you can do that. And then just get in here and get it all mixed in. And I always start with 3/4 of a cup of water. We may or may not need more. This is something that it does depend on the brand of your flour, and it also depends on your weather, similar to a pie crust. And it looks like I do need a little bit more water, and you just want to go a little bit at a time. Just like other gluten-free things, we're going for kind of a texture rather than an exact amount. And if you accidentally put in too much water, it's okay. We are going to be using a little bit of flour to roll these out. It's not ruined if you add in too much extra water. If you don't add enough water, it's a little harder to manage the tortillas. Now at this point, I am going to get in here with my hand and I want to feel the dough and see what it's doing. And if you squish it, very similar to a pie crust, it feels damp and it is holding its shape. But you can see I still have a lot of dry pockets of flour in here. So I am going to add in a little bit more water. If you've been watching my channel for very long, you'll know that I don't use xanthan gum in hardly any of my recipes. But my original tortilla recipe, I do use it in there, and some of my bread recipes. But with the cassava flour, you don't need that. And I really like that because I don't like to use xanthan gum very much. It does have its place, but I really prefer not to use it. So once your dough comes together in a ball like this, you really want to give it a good knead, mash it around, make sure you do have enough water in there. And if you start to mash it around and you notice it breaks apart like this, just sprinkle a little bit of extra water. We're almost there, but not quite. And the tricky thing about this flour is sometimes you think you need a lot more water, and so you dump in what you think you need, and it ends up being too much. And this is what we're looking for. You want it to be able to mash together, it's not crumbling apart, and the dough actually feels damp. It's not sticking to my hands, but when you feel it, it feels like it might be too wet, but it isn't. If you added in too much water, it would be kind of soupy, and it would really stick to your hands and really be kind of a batter more than a dough. But this is what we're looking for. You want it to feel damp. So now that that's ready, and give myself some room here. I do have a piece of parchment paper for laying out my tortillas, and then I've got 2 pieces of parchment paper to roll out my tortillas. I do have a tortilla press, and I'm not going to be using it today, but I wanted to show you how easy this is to make tortillas with just a rolling pin and parchment paper. So break off some dough, and then I start forming it into little balls. Try to get them all the same size. If you're like me, you might get 2 that are the same size and the rest are all just kind of smaller or bigger. You could weigh these if you wanted to be exact. I don't really care. And I don't actually have an exact amount to give you of how many this recipe will make. It all depends on how big or small you make your tortillas. I usually end up going with this size, which will yield, maybe a tortilla about that big. And I said I wasn't going to give you an exact number. I've got 20 little balls of dough. So if at any point, while we're rolling out our tortillas, when you get to kind of the end ones here, if you feel like they've dried out, sitting here waiting for their turn, the best thing that I found is you just have a little glass of water and you just dip your hands in and roll it around, and that usually will add just enough moisture so they're not dried out. And then I just go a little bit of flour, and then I kind of flatten out the tortilla just to give it a little bit of a head start, and then just a little bit of flour on top. And then I always bring the parchment paper to the edge, and then I lean against it to hold it in place. And then you just start rolling out your tortillas. You really want to get them as thin as possible. And do your best to keep them in a circle. You can flip over your parchment paper. And then very carefully peel off the top parchment. And then flip over your 2 pieces of parchment paper and peel off the other side. And then if you need to, a bench scraper really helps to pick them up. They are fragile, so be careful, but they do hold together. And then just a little bit of extra flour. I think this one's more of a square. And we'll just call these rustic. A rustic shaped tortilla. So I don't have a very large piece of parchment here. The more I roll out my tortillas, the more I'll have room, but I don't like to stack these together. They have a tendency to stick, and they do have a tendency to break apart. So when you go to transfer your tortilla, if it breaks apart, it's kind of an indication that you don't have enough moisture in your dough. And before I finish this third one, I am going to turn on my skillet on medium heat. It's a dry non-stick skillet, no oil or anything. I do have a spatula, and then I've got a cooling rack over here. That can heat up. I can usually fit about 2 to 3 this size in my frying pan at one time. And I'm really not using hardly any extra flour at all. If you don't use 2 pieces of parchment paper and just a rolling pin, you need a lot more flour so these don't stick to the counter or the rolling pin. Once your skillet is hot, very carefully place in however many tortillas will fit. And if you pick one up and it cracks apart, just kind of press it back together. And then just keep rolling the rest of your tortillas while these ones are cooking. Don't forget about them though. Once they start to look dried out on top and they have brown spots on the other side, they're ready to flip over. So now we just cook these on the other side. And if you end up with a little bit too much extra flour, this is what happens. But that's all right. And if your edges are really thin, they will burn, but this is okay. It's not burnt, it's just dark. Now that my pan is nice and hot, I am going to turn the heat down just a little bit. And then add in 3 more tortillas. So I've noticed the first pan of tortillas always seems to take the longest. Once the pan gets hot, you can really get moving quickly. And then once these over here on the cooling rack are cooled off, I'll start stacking them to make room for my next tortillas. So I just took my last 3 tortillas out of the pan. And you might feel like you've cooked them too much and they're dried out and they're like a cracker. But just give it time. This is where it's kind of magic. So once they cool off, I do stack them here. So these ones are really hot and they're kind of stiff and you think you might have cooked them too long. But these ones over here are cooled off and they're really flexible. I mean, if you keep bending it, you might break it. But look at this. Gluten-free tortilla that is flexible and not breaking. And I'll just keep showing you all of my stack. Look, you could roll that up into a burrito. I also want to show you that I did make some yesterday that are made with olive oil. And I was experimenting. I was trying out olive oil and I've had these in the fridge. Take them out to room temperature. And I didn't roll these ones as thin. You can see there really is a big difference. These ones actually look more of a circle shape because they are. And I left them quite a bit thicker. And this actually reminds me more of a flatbread than a tortilla. And I could have rolled them even thinner. But I was just experimenting and I wanted to see which one I liked better. Here in my house, these ones were the winner. Even though they look terrible, they're small, they're not even a circle at all. We prefer the butter flavor over the olive oil. Even though these ones look nicer, it's okay. I don't mind if they look terrible. So, olive oil does work. And if you like a really thick tortilla, then roll them thicker. So that worked out really good. And then some of these, even though they got a little bit darker than I wanted, they're still really flexible. I had them in the fridge, but then I've kind of let them come out to room temperature. Right out of the fridge, they're not as bendy. But look at all of these that have been sitting here, super flexible, just like a tortilla. So 20 tortillas. You could make chicken enchiladas. You could make my green chili casserole, even though I usually make that one with corn tortillas. You could make breakfast burritos, whatever you want. And you can see the lines from my parchment paper. That's all right. And if you can see that, of course, this one is a lot darker. It's not burnt, but it is darker, where this one is just very golden little spots here. Look at that. You can roll it up. Not exactly like a regular flour tortilla, but one of the best gluten-free flour tortillas I've ever had and ever made. It even tears like a tortilla. So even though they look terrible, they don't look anything like a circle tortilla, they act just like a tortilla. And it tastes like a tortilla. I mean, tortillas don't really taste like much of anything. It's more of what you put in them. You know, your breakfast burrito filling, a fajita filling, tacos. And they're chewy, like a tortilla. So don't be fooled that they look terrible. Oh, and this is a good example to show you. This one got a little bit crispy around the edges. The inside is still really bendy. And if you wanted to try these ones that are a little bit thicker with olive oil, this is what they look like. They do still tear like a regular tortilla, and they are very soft and bendy. And these ones are a lot chewier. Of course, because they are thicker, but equally good. You can also make these with milk instead of the water. That works out okay, but I prefer the water. I think cassava flour is absolutely worth trying out. I know it's a little bit more expensive than a regular gluten-free flour, but the results are absolutely amazing. And this will be my go-to tortilla recipe from now on, or from when I first started experimenting with them. To have something that is so close to the original that is still gluten-free without any of the other added stuff in there, it's a win-win for me. By far the best gluten-free tortilla I've ever had or ever made. Let me know what you think if you make this recipe. Maybe you've already made my original tortilla recipe that's in my cookbook and here on my channel. That tortilla is a really good tortilla, but this one is so much better. So I hope you make this too, and I hope you like it as much as I do. It really is delicious. But thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have any questions or comments, let me know, and I'll see you on the next one.